Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our monthly office hour webinar series. Tonight, we are excited to be working with our wonderful co-sponsors, Parsons Continuing and Professional Education, to bring you this webinar. So here on our network, we like to invite successful and inspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders to share their stories and lessons that they've learned along the way. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy is a platform that empowers creative entrepreneurs like yourselves to build sustainable businesses around your art. And we achieve this through our 3 pillars that includes our mentoring platform, training through our courses, and community via our network. Since launching our platform globally this year, we were recently honored by Fast Company for their 2021 World Changing Ideas list. You can visit parsonsentrepreneur.com to learn more about our 3 product offerings. So for today's webinar, we are going to be teaching you about creating a minimum viable product for your creative business. And it's going to be delivered by one of our amazing mentors, Shobana, Mani. For all of you who tuned in today, if you stick around till the end, we'll be offering a special coupon code that will give you a 20% off discount on a mentoring session with Shobana if you would like to continue working on your minimum viable product at the end of the webinar. So stick around till the end. I will be popping in after Shobana delivers her content to provide you with the code. Also today, for tuning in as a bonus, if you look in the chat, we are going to be providing a link to a Finding Your Minimum Viable Product roadmap document. That is one of the tools that Shobana is going to be using tonight in the webinar. So feel free to click on it to download your own. You can follow along with her, or you can use it after the webinar is done to work on your own product. So during the webinar, Shobana is going to present for about 50 to 60 minutes. And throughout the hour, she will be taking questions throughout each section. So if you have a question as she goes along, please leave it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please don't leave questions in the regular chat. The questions that are in the Q&A box will be the ones that are addressed first. At the end, there'll be an extra 15 to 20 minutes for more questions. So don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A box. And now I'd like to introduce our amazing mentor, Shobana. So Shobana's background is a unique blend of finance and strategy, fashion and textile design, and experience in emerging markets. She's spent over a decade in the finance industry, working with corporations such as Goldman Sachs, as well as countries and organizations. Her experience is global, having spent time working in the emerging markets based in London, and then transplanting to the United States. She helps entrepreneurs position their business and build tools that will help them manage and grow their company in the context of their financial situation. So now I will hand it over to Shobana.
Thank you so much for being here today. And Carly Ann, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm very much looking forward to walking you through the presentation, which will start in a moment. And then you have your PDF roadmap, which we'll talk about as well. Please do think of this as a discussion. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and I'll try to loop them in so that we feel like this is very interactive. And let's get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Today we're going to talk about minimum viable products, and we're going to talk about them specifically in the context of being a creative. Some of the challenges and the experiences that we have as creative entrepreneurs is very different to that of typical entrepreneurs. So this particular presentation is very much skewed towards those that are in the creative industries. What it's all about is breaking through those ideas of perfectionism or analysis paralysis, or trying to work on, for example, if you're a designer, an entire collection, breaking that down to a minimum viable product or service that you can get out there and get into the marketplace and begin a feedback loop and start to grow your business. Now, when you all signed up for this presentation, sorry, I'm just getting this going. When you all signed up for the presentation, you must have seen these 6 areas that are kind of what we hope to achieve by going through this presentation. The idea really is to get paid while you're prototyping. So by creating a minimum viable product, it's the way to actually create a bit of cash flow as well that you can save and put towards building up your business and your brand. As well as that, we want to build awareness around you and develop a brand. And part of this MVP process is really doing just that. It's also important not to be running blind, to know what people think. Who is your target customer? Does the product or service resonate with them, and why? And what could you do to make it better? Now, I'm right there with you. We all feel overwhelmed. There's so many variables to manage when you're starting a business, and when you're a creative entrepreneur, there are even more variables typically. There's also operational know-how, which many of us may not have on a larger scale. The MVP allows you to break it down into pieces and learn that operational know-how in a bite-sized way, and therefore build upon it. We also can sometimes feel a bit of an imposter syndrome, like, are we really a creative entrepreneur? Do we really have a great business idea? By starting with an MVP, you're able to get out there and talk to people and socialize your ideas. And that gives you some credibility and confidence. And that's really important in being an entrepreneur. It's very important to kind of present yourself in a way where people feel that what you're doing makes sense and they want to buy into what you're about. Finally, and really most important, it's all about minimizing your risk. We don't want anyone here to feel that they have to take their savings and put it over towards starting a livelihood out of their art. What we want to do is take the right steps so that your risk is minimum, but you're able to grow your idea and build from there. So let's go to the next slide. So the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy has been excellent. It's a great resource for really getting that creative entrepreneur toolkit. Part of that has been the business canvas and how to identify a business plan in quick and easy steps. It's been thinking about your value proposition and populating ideas around it. Thinking about money, how can you bootstrap, how can you save, how can you attract capital? It's also about leveraging your current network and seeing what resources you have that you can utilize. And finally, we've learned also about branding and positioning of your product and your brand and even yourself, and how you can work with a community to effectively do this. Sometimes, though, it leaves us feeling a bit like, what next? This is all theoretical, but what about in practice? So the minimum viable product is all about creating something to get all of those learnings into practice. It's about making an idea into a tangible product or service. It's about building awareness around your idea, your brand, and your business idea. It's about creating an effective feedback loop for your creative stamp, so people know what your aesthetic is, what it is that you bring as a creative person. And it's finally about validating, affirming, and tweaking your business plan so you feel that it's something that you can go to investors with and socialize amongst that community and attract capital. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. Let's talk about minimum viable products, and let's talk about how it's actually much more than a prototype. Now, this terminology is often used amongst tech entrepreneurs. They tend to use this methodology a lot to spin out new tech ideas. Eric Ries, who's an author of the Lean Startup Movement, he defines the minimum viable product. He says the minimum viable product is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. The concept has long existed and has been readily adopted. Founders like to operate in an efficient feedback loop, and this methodology allows them to test hypotheses. So they might formulate a view that people need a marketplace to buy books. And then that view gets tested, and then they realize people actually in their marketplace to buy more than just books. And that's how you get to kind of an Amazon-sized level tech business. And so on with Instagram. It first started as photo sharing, and then it added on features. This whole concept of testing a hypothesis allows someone to distill what their true value proposition really is. Moreover, the most important thing, and I think especially for creative entrepreneurs, is this concept of a feedback loop. And why do I say this, especially for creative entrepreneurs? Well, it's basically because a lot of our ideation happens within ourselves. We sketch, we journal, we write, we do a lot of thinking. I mean, I know for one, when I'm asleep at night, that's when I get the best ideas. But that's really hard to test and to know if that's going to resonate with a target consumer. And after all, you need to consider a target audience and a consumer to take your passion into a business and scale. So the most important thing about a feedback loop is it allows you to test a prototype and create a community. And that community, when engaged, will form into customers. So I think, one of the biggest takeaways to keep in mind is that the prototyping process is all about getting maximum feedback. And whilst the minimum viable product should be a simplified form of your vision, you want to make sure that it has all the features and bells and whistles that kind of indicate and articulate your creative stamp, so the feedback you're getting makes sense and resonates with where your business strategy is going. We'll continue to talk more about that as we go along. So as you continue to build on your minimum viable product, and what I want to emphasize here is that there's not one minimum viable product and that's it, and it's rigid, and it's an actual item or it's an actual service. It can be, and you will see when we go to the case study portion, that it can be done in various ways. But the most important point here is that there is a minimum viable product which can evolve and iterate, and it can change, and you can have a second minimum viable product with tweaked features. So that's an idea as well that you should keep in mind. And while in the process of doing this, the idea would be that you would affirm and tweak your business plan. Now, one thing that I feel as an entrepreneur myself, that it's often hard to describe a value proposition when you're a creative entrepreneur. In the tech world, when they're asked for a value proposition, they always say, well, what problem are you solving? And by describing what problem you're solving, you have your value proposition. As a creative who makes art or graphic design, a culinary chef, someone who likes to do filmmaking, it's hard to necessarily know in a very specific and detailed way what problem you're solving. And that approach sometimes can be a little stifling. But what MVPs help you do is figure out actually what your value proposition is. You have some idea of what it is, but by putting a product firsthand with customers or a service firsthand with clients, you're able to see what resonates and how they themselves echo back to you what your value proposition is. So it's especially handy in the process of tweaking your business plan, your business canvas. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I'm going to take a moment just to check on the Q&A. Okay, it looks like we are good. Please do feel free to put questions so that I know I haven't overlooked something. So as we continue along, let's think about the overwhelm involved in starting a creative business. There's a lot of variables involved. Now here I've taken the example of a fashion designer. A fashion designer has to consider size, fit, fabric, color, seasons. I mean, the list goes on. Technical drawings, measurements. I myself, being a designer, fully understand that. And it can be overwhelming when you're trying to start a business, almost feeling like, well, where do I start? Prototyping helps you drill down into what resources you have, what you need, and work with them on a small scale. And run that operational process in a small scale, which allows you to feel that it's manageable, that you're able to get a sense of what works, what doesn't, who are the right partners for your business. This is especially important because you're de-risking the execution of your business. What does that mean? So when you grow your business and you take on the operational risk, which is working with partners, producing your product, distributing your product, getting it marketed. As you work with those people, you take on risk. Things could go wrong. Something may not arrive. Something can be sewed wrong in the case of a designer, a fashion designer. So what a minimum viable product allows you to do is it allows you to cut down on those variables and focus on a very focused set of variables that you can control and manage. And you can almost manage it within, let's say, not in the public eye, so to speak, because you're slowly ratcheting up your marketplace and your distribution. So you're able to kind of iron out all the kinks in the operational procedures in getting your business started. And you're also able to, in a way, do a trial interview of whom could be partners for your business as well. So yet another thing to keep in mind in taking on the minimum viable product approach. Now, I want to talk for a moment about these three kind of areas, which I know in the business canvas and setting of your business plan is spoken a lot about. I like to think about it in a triangle formation. And I particularly like to think about it this way because I believe there is a tension, a pull and a push between these three areas, between your target customer and what they want and what they need, between competitors and what they provide and what they don't provide, and between what you can provide. And this is a constant kind of moving, it's a dynamic model. It's not kind of siloed, it continues to move. And what your MVP allows you to do is test these three areas in a product or service. And the feedback loop provides data to then go in and tweak and work with the tension that is between these three areas. And as you better understand your target customer's needs and wants, you can also better understand what it is about your value proposition that differs from competitors, and therefore position your product in a much more clear, communicative way. And one of the most important things to starting and growing your business is how you communicate your message. So the minimum viable product is vital in creating that feedback loop, providing that data, and then feeding it in to this kind of tension and pull and push, and allowing you to really get a very finite sense of these areas. Oftentimes when people do their business plans, they define these areas, but they may not think of them as working together. And I think it's very important to think of it in that context. Now, in the context of building an MVP for creatives, a lot of us have grand visions of what we want to achieve as an entrepreneur. We're very good at, visualizing in general, and so therefore visualizing our business is something that comes naturally. But there's always going to be a more direct, less complicated version of your product that you can get to market. There's also going to be a lot of idea generation for collaborative work. So in coming up with potential minimum viable products, you can think of ways in which to work with other creative entrepreneurs and perhaps combine their skills, their vision, and what they want to achieve with what you want to achieve, and work on a minimum viable product together and to test what it is, their value proposition and yours in that same product. We'll talk about that as well in the case studies and examples. Finally, what's great about the world we live in today are all these tools that we have available to build an audience, to build a community, to get a pulse on what we're doing. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, it's there. And if utilized in a strategic way, and again, we'll learn about that as we look at the case studies, you can truly get an audience that is very engaged and very vested in your business succeeding, and almost helps you to define your brand. Sometimes how you think of your brand and how you see it may not be how an audience sees it. And understanding that and building that audience and getting that engagement will be vital in the creative sphere of MVPs. The other thing I want to say is that oftentimes when tech entrepreneurs look at doing minimum viable products, there are very rigid or frameworks around what those should look like, what procedures should take place? What are the steps? What should that minimum viable product be? The best thing about being creative is that we can be creative about our minimum viable product. There are so many ways to think about even having a minimum viable product that's not necessarily something we even have to build. And you'll see that as well in the case studies. So let's continue onward. And I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat to make sure that there is. Okay, so how do we identify what our minimum viable product will be? We want to be quick to prototype, but we want maximum feedback. Now, this chart is purposely kind of set up in a way where you don't know where it ends or where it starts, because there's really no, kind of discipline around that. It's kind of about just jotting down different aspects of your ideas, about your vision into these key areas. Okay, so what is your creative stamp? What it is about you as a creative that you bring that you can kind of identify as your initial value proposition. You want to be able to define that. You want to be strategic in your thinking. So that is that your MVP should really be a stepping stone for what it is that you plan on building out as a business. So, I'll give you a good example. During the pandemic, you had a lot of people making masks, which I think is great. They were needed, and these designers were able to fill a need. However, to some extent, I think some people might have felt that that was a great stepping stone to a business. And in some cases where that can be an issue is if that step is not truly an MVP. It's a product, but does it fit in the grand scale of the business you want to launch, the vision you have? Does it fit in with your creative stamp? Doing work like that is excellent. You have skills and you're filling a need and you're bringing in cash flow. But when you think of your MVP, you need to be very strategic as to how it fits in the grand plan. You want to make sure you identify all products and services that could potentially be an MVP. And you want to make sure that you're not kind of limiting yourself. So if, as a designer, you would think that my MVP has to be a product, but not necessarily. It could potentially even be a service. So you want to really be very open-minded in ideating and thinking and brainstorming about your MVP. And you could have multiple, as I said before. It's a good idea to build a spreadsheet. So that's why we've provided you with this roadmap to finding your MVP PDF. So you can essentially use that as your spreadsheet, or you can take the details from that and build your own spreadsheet. You want to continually re-examine and pare down your MVP ideas so that they're simplified enough that the resources needed and the execution needed is manageable, but at the same time contain features that are test-worthy. You want to socialize your ideas. You want to survey, interview people, talk to target customers. Now, this doesn't mean talk to your friends or talk to mom and dad. It actually means to go and talk with people you may not know. Utilize tools like SurveyMonkey and other ways in which you could use the Google Survey service even, and identify groups of people you'd like to get their opinion. As long as you make your survey palatable and easy to answer, people tend to oblige. People like to be involved in what's new and up and coming. And when you're a creative entrepreneur, people are even more excited because it really feels like there could be something, something creative and exciting that's about to come out. The other thing to keep in mind is to test key features. So tech entrepreneurs, for them, again, it's very straightforward. They might want to test the ability to send a direct message. They may want to test the ability to, put a filter on a photo, things like that. For creative entrepreneurs, this may be a little bit more complex, but when we talk about the case studies, you'll start to see how it's not something that we need to shy away from. And we should really think, what are the key features of our creative stamp, of our aesthetics, of our creativity, and try to marry them in to our MVP so we see if it resonates. Now, I've got a question here, so I'm going to go ahead and just try and see if it will just pop up. Okay, so someone wanted a copy of the recording, so that will be provided, I believe, later. And additionally, I tend to put a lot of information on my slides, so you can always screenshot if you're not comfortable taking notes. I fully understand. I do the same thing. I screenshot a lot of things. Okay, now let's talk about the benefits of an MVP approach. So we'll go through this quickly because I want to get to the case studies that are really fun. So establishing your own community. And the community and customer interaction can truly help you develop a brand and identify in the real world what is your brand DNA. You're going to get small scale learnings for a big scale business. That's that operational experience that helps you de-risk what you're about to endeavor upon. Your business plan vision is taking a tangible form. That's huge because that helps you attract capital, start conversations, socialize your idea, and most importantly to me, is it gives you confidence and credibility. How does it feel when you see someone wearing your garment or utilizing your product or utilizing your service and seeing their reaction? And typically a positive one. It feels great and it gives you confidence and you're able to really truly feel that you're on that entrepreneurial journey. It's very important. So let's think about what you must also include. Your creative stamp, quality, this is not a race, features that define your value proposition. Be very clear about what you're testing. Know what you're testing when you're putting a product out. You might get other feedback. You might learn other things that you never thought of, but it's always good to have a direction when you go out. And you want to try and build on something that's sticky, that's going to resonate. So socialize your idea before you endeavor to build and execute on your MVP. All right, so this is the roadmap which many of you might have opened and you will receive or have received. And let me just take a quick look at Q&As. Okay, so Andre Stone said, can you talk more about leveraging existing resources? Say, for example, we want to test out an MVP in the fashion space without textile experience or access. So the idea of leveraging existing resources basically means thinking about who you know, what you know, and how you can marry those together in a collaborative way and utilize them to get, to your MVP. Now, we're going to talk about lack of experience. So Andre mentions without textile experience or access as being one of his, let's say, challenges. We're going to talk about the founder of Spanx and actually how she had no experience whatsoever in creating garments. But she utilized what was out there. And in those days, there was certainly less available at our fingertips than there is now. So I would actually, make the point that even if you don't have the actual experience with textiles, you can talk to a lot of people and access them via LinkedIn, via Instagram, DMing, watching YouTube videos. You can build that knowledge and you can look for ways to collaborate. As I said, think about what resources you have and you bring and who you might know who might have those resources and talk to people. This entrepreneurial journey is not to be something that happens overnight, and that's really what I want to show you through the case studies. It's a stepping stone process, and a lot of it is research and doing that research and reading up on what you can do. So I have another question from Margarita, and she's actually asking for an example of a creative stamp. So she's asking me what an example of that is. So I will give you an example of what I believe my creative stamp is. I use color quite a bit. And in my garments, I always have an element of textile design, whether it be surface, so embroidery or some techniques that I use to create a design on the surface of the garment, or dyeing the fabric, or creating print. So it's kind of what you want to be known for as a creative entrepreneur. I hope that answers the question. The next question I had from Jess regarding managing overwhelm. What are some tactics or mindset tips you have to avoid burnout? So I think it's really important to have balance in your journey and not make, I think they like to show on TV and in articles and, in podcasts how being an entrepreneur, you're doing it 24 hours, you're always working. I don't really think that's healthy, nor do I think it's necessary. How does that expression go? Work smarter instead of harder. There are ways to cut the process and the steps to building a business into small and digestible ways in order to get to a point where you're building something. Pick an area to focus on. So sort of say to yourself, okay, I'm going to streamline what I want to do, and dwindle down from your grand vision into that MVP. And that's really one way to manage the overwhelm. I'm going to take one last question and go through the roadmap because I think it might help if I talk through some examples. So Diana Zer asks, what is the best way to test ideas without revealing or giving away the idea? So this is one of those kind of, I want to say, like legends of entrepreneurialism that you're going to be giving away your idea. For the most part, ideas exist. Ideas pretty much exist, but it's how you execute them, how you engage your audience, how you, in your unique way, position a product and engage with your community and deliver and distribute that product. That's what makes it interesting and special from you. So I spent a year in Silicon Valley, and prior to then had worked with startups. And I knew a couple of people doing the similar thing to what Instagram effectively has done or did when it first started out, photo sharing. I knew several. One of our friends was doing a similar business. And you have, the only way to build a business is to get out of an echo chamber, get out of a vacuum, go out there and talk to people and show them your idea. Because you just don't know if someone will actually pay for something unless you're able to see their reaction and what works and what doesn't. I don't think, I think there are ways of, maybe keeping certain features for later and starting with some features early on and working from there. But it's really as a creative entrepreneur, you have almost a little bit of an edge here because what you're putting out there is really special to you and your aesthetic and how your creativity manifests itself. So let's go through, there's another person who's asked a question, but I'm going to just go back now to the roadmap and then I'll come back to the questions in just a little bit. So I've got 3 examples in the corner there. I've got a women's wear designer who loves textiles. Guess who that might be? I've got a recent sustainable buildings design grad, one of my clients, and then I have a culinary savant who's also another client of mine. So let's actually talk about the culinary savant first. So this is a guy that has really high level of culinary skills, specifically with pastry and kind of focused in on the pastry area. And he really wants to create new and different recipes in the pastry area. However, he doesn't have credibility necessarily as a pastry chef. He doesn't have a following, and he doesn't know if those flavors are truly a good idea. But he wants to try and test that out while having a bit of cash inflow. So his grand vision is to have this pastry business that brings novel and interesting kind of tastes and ideas in terms of recipes, something that pushes the envelope. And the brand vision would be to have maybe a store or an e-commerce site to kind of deliver these products. His target audience really are people that are particularly interested in pastries and those that are unique in nature. So think about someone who would go for that croissant donut mixed thing that you get in New York City. So, that's kind of his target, people who really will kind of go and look for those type of pastries. Now, we went through and talked about possible ways for him to build a community, get a feedback loop, see if people will try his product. Yes, one could argue that he could for free provide these cookies. But again, he doesn't really have a community or a following, so some people may not want to try it. People who are in the category of liking very high-end pastry may feel like, well, why should I take these free cookies? Sounds a little, it may sound a little suspect. Plus, for the culinary savant, it's not great for him because he's having to put this money out and not necessarily, he might get feedback, he may not. It's a little bit of a risk. So how do we de-risk that? So we talked about perhaps just making cookies around an event. So a recent event, graduation. So he went within his community, joined a parents group on Facebook, and offered to make your mom's or your grandma's homemade chocolate chip cookies. Who wouldn't want those, right? There's an audience for that, an obvious audience. And he would kind of, personalize those cookies. And alongside those cookies, he would give a few of his specialized recipes as a gift. So he would sell the chocolate chip cookies and attach to that 2 or 3 of the flavors he was inventing as a bonus. So that made his customers feel great about the opportunity. That gave him feedback on his recipes, and he got cash flow for those basic kind of chocolate chip cookies that he was personalizing. And in doing so, started to develop a community that he was engaging with, started to develop a customer base. And he seized upon the opportunity of the graduation when people are kind of looking for something unique and something special to really capture the moment. The other thing that he did, which I think is super interesting, was there's test kitchens that are often underutilized or have some capacity. So he found a time when he could utilize a test kitchen and a test kitchen is basically, a kitchen that's used for industrial level production, and it's set up particularly for that purpose. And people tend to rent it out. And he noticed there was a block of time that it just wasn't being used. Now, it wasn't a place that you'd want to have necessarily as a storefront because it was kind of in the industrial part of town, and you wouldn't necessarily want high-end pastry customers coming there. But what he did was set up the business as being purely online and purely as he started to kind of say, okay, tomorrow we're going to have X, Y, and Z available for purchase. And he had a limited production with these interesting flavors for donuts. And, there's already a donut market, and he was kind of adding the little high-end spin to it. And by utilizing the test kitchen at a time when no one wanted it, he was able to kind of get that at a diminished rate. So he was using a resource there for the business owner of the test kitchen and was able to negotiate kind of a lower rate to utilize that and got that space. And how did he fund that? Well, the chocolate chip sales went to fund the second MVP effectively. And he continued to build his community. And that got him to thinking, well, I'm using this test kitchen at such and such hour. I wonder if there's other pockets of time when it's available and there's other products I could do. And that was the process of him growing out his vision. So you start to see that his creative stamp in this case were these recipes that he was kind of truly having fun coming up with. And he found a way to get people to try it while also having cash flow come in to help grow his business. So if you go through the checklist and you ask yourself, how was this idea strategic to his brand vision? Well, by testing these actual different tasting cookies, it was very strategic. It was exactly what he wanted. It was a true stepping stone to what he wanted to do. He wanted to be known for these interesting recipes. And you fill out this chart, and you think about, has he streamlined it? Yes, because he's kept it on a very small scale, 1 or 2 cookie flavors. That's it. And he's already making, the chocolate chip cookies. It's connected to his value proposition and helped him kind of hone in. People didn't like some things. People liked other things. It helped him hone that in. It helped him develop a community. It was a product. There was operational experience gained in running a test kitchen and getting orders and distributing and fulfilling those. So he started to learn that process and what resources were needed and what he already had. And he was able to keep in mind the cost considerations and effectively order his MVPs in a way where one MVP that made money was able to fund another that needed an initial cash spend. So that's really, I like that example quite a bit. Another person I'll talk about is a recent sustainable building design grad. So this is a person who studies sustainable building design in terms of construction, interior design, kind of the full gamut, and has a very broad vision of being involved in that sustainable building design sector, whether it's residential or commercial, has that general vision. And had so many ideas, but didn't know necessarily the best way to order them and how to go about executing on this grand vision. So we talked about it, and we went through and just listed every possible way in which sustainable building design is needed, whether it be advisory services or whether it be in a product. We went through it and we listed, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's something she's currently working on and she'd prefer me not to, so I very much respect that. But what I want to say is it really helped her take this vision and build it down into bite-sized portions, and then look at the resources, the people that she knew and the skills that she had, and put those together and find a way to just get started. Part of this minimum viable product process is about getting started. It's about taking a paper business plan and actually having something tangible. And so that was what was truly important for her. So let's go to the last example about the women's wear designer who loves textiles. So, effectively, this is someone who basically wants to start a business that's very much focused on textiles and, sell their clothing. Now, one of the things that is particularly important, and this is, of course, me that we're talking about, is sustainability and sustainable aspects of consumption. So slow fashion, slow products that fall into that. So one of the ideas of the grand visions is to actually have either an e-commerce or a brick and mortar store that has products that fall in this category. So one of the things that I did, and this is an MVP, that's not something I built, that's not something I constructed, but something I used and built a feedback loop around it and built awareness around me. In the place where I live, there was a sustainable market, show at a nearby kind of venue. And so I used that opportunity to go and observe, to learn what products were available, what products people liked, what was selling, what wasn't selling, what is it about sustainability that is important to customers, in a very finite sense. So that's an example, using an MVP that's existing, but taking features of it and using it back into your business, and then also presenting yourself as someone who's involved in that forum. So I'm going to take a quick look at questions. Okay, so anonymous attendee asked, what comes first, creating the product or building the community? And I'm just going to take a look at my time as well. Okay, so I would say that it's interesting because a lot of people have no problem kind of having followers on Instagram, but remember that word strategic. You really want to think of the community you're building as strategic to your vision and to your business. So it's really important that you have a product or service in mind when you're building out that community. And sooner or later, when you're engaging that community and when you're building that community, at some point they're going to want to see what it is that you're about. What is this as an entrepreneur, as a creative entrepreneur, what is it that you want to sell effectively? And so I think to some extent you can start, and a lot of people advise, start blogging, start writing about what you're doing, talk about your process. I think all of that is great. But, you should also have in mind that actually building out a product and getting that out there actually leads to real useful feedback versus kind of feedback that's abstract. Heather Anderson asks, how important is it to establish a brand standard branding, even basic, before developing and presenting your MVP? Super good question, Heather. Branding is, it's vital, it's important. I totally get it. Yeah, I work for a company, I work for Goldman Sachs, and one of the most interesting things about Goldman Sachs is no matter where you go in the world to a Goldman Sachs office, they all look exactly the same. Furniture, style, presentation style, everything. And they do that because they're very strong about their brand and what they stand for. So I know the value of the brand and branding. However, that's an expense and that can also take time. And with an MVP, you want to be quick. I don't, I think that people get so excited about products and services that sometimes some of that kind of gloss that comes with branding and packaging can be, it does not need to be at the forefront of what you're trying to get feedback on. You're not getting feedback necessarily on your branding. You're getting feedback on your product or your service. So you kind of want to order that in a way where you have your product or service. I would also argue that by having your product or service when you work with someone on your branding, if you do, or when you yourself are coming up with your branding, having the feedback loop helps you to define the brand, the colors. You don't want to do these things in a vacuum. So by having that product out there, you're getting the feedback, you're able to develop your brand in a way that is taking into account what your MVP is telling you. I hope that was helpful. Tyler Caranco is asking, how do you leverage your social media community and transform the community into individuals who are invested in and want to buy your MVP? Very good question again. And the way that you do that is you engage them and you get them involved in your process. You show them process pictures. You put your MVP out there. You ask them for feedback. Ask them what colors work. Does this solve, does this meet your needs? Is this something that you want? Get them involved in surveys. Form a panel, talk with them. The more that someone has put some time into something, the more they tend to then want to be involved in the final result. And the way you leverage that social media community is you just have to constantly think about being strategic to your brand. It's very easy to get an Instagram account, a TikTok account, and just start amassing followers. But it's not as easy being strategic and thoughtful about that process. Now, the last thing, so I'm going to move on to the case studies and then I'll answer the next person's question. So I've talked about all this stuff and some of you might be wondering, well, is this for real? Has this really happened? So we're going to take a couple of fun examples and we're actually going to look at their stories. One of the key things that I do as an entrepreneur is I'm always reading about other successful entrepreneurs and I drill down because sometimes you can listen to a podcast and they'll say something like, oh yeah, like I just somehow got $30,000 in funding and I started this business. And you're sitting there and you're like, you didn't just get it. Like what happened before that? And what happened before that? You want to know actually truly how they started. And you don't often get that. But with a little bit of research on the internet, you can get to the bottom of it. And I think it's been really interesting for me to put this together because I myself also learned a couple of things about some of these brands that I know and like and didn't realize. Okay, so we're going to use good old meme, how it started, how it's going. So Lil Nas X is my favorite example because he's amazingly intelligent and amazingly creative. So, this was a meme that he put out himself about himself on June 2000. So his initial tweet was June 2018. And keep in mind that Old Town Road, I might even sing it, was recorded in December 2018. So he kind of was like almost like starting, he basically was driving his own internet engagement. And then you'll see, in 2020, effectively, all the awards he received. I believe he recorded with Billy Ray Cyrus in something like April 2019. So, and this is someone who is not connected to the industry, did not have a trust fund. I think he lived with his siblings and his grandmother in a community, and I think they even might have shared a bed if I read that correctly. So this is someone that truly you looked at and did not ever feel like he didn't have a resource. Despite his circumstances, he still was able to find what resources he has. So let's take a look. All right, so his vision was to make his music viral, okay? And his value proposition, and keep in mind, this is what I am interpreting. His value proposition was his unique talent for creating something catchy that would be tailor-made for the internet. What was his MVP? This is where it gets interesting. His MVP was the internet. He made meme accounts and started to build a community that way and test. test what's catchy, what sticks, what do people find funny, what do people find offensive. He ran some of Nicki Minaj's fan sites as well to build another feedback loop. And he was always very strategic. He would spend a lot of time on his phone, on the internet, wherever he could find it. But he used the internet as if it was strategic to his business, and it was. He honed in his internet savvy like you wouldn't believe, because he had the creative talent to write. And he could write all day long. But in a vacuum of writing, he doesn't know if his song would stick. So he studied the internet and he tested different kinds of words and rhythms and ways and styles of writing through these accounts and saw what people liked and didn't like. From doing that, he also gleaned that basically streaming was really the way in which to become, we're in the streaming age. That's how songs get out there. And so he realized that part of that was having, the key learning was that he had to have a short song, a catchy song, and it needed to be funny. He actually bought the beat for Old Town Road for $30. He made sure that it was geared toward the streaming age. So the original cut was 1:53. His streams on Spotify are counted. So when you stream something on Spotify, they count it after 30 seconds. And so typically the chorus hits at 45. Lil Nas X knew that. So what did he do? His chorus drops at 13 seconds and it lasts for over 30 seconds, ensuring that it would rack up streams. His lyrics were viral. The way in which he writes, the way in which he thinks about words and putting them together, he had studied that. He had become a master of that. He liked the idea of fusing hip hop and country as well, I think, because that was unique, something different. In terms of, his memes, actually, he launched his song and then he would strategically be posting online, engaging social media, not necessarily as himself. He started a Reddit page asking, hey, what is this Old Town Road? And then other people would write about it. He actually put in the song title some of the lyrics of the song to help make it viral. So he really was a student of SEO, the way in which search works. He utilized something that is free to all and readily available to make it work, because he did not come from, trust funds and resources, but he knew that he had one resource and one resource alone, and there was a way. If he spent time and was strategic, he could make it work because his creativity was so unique that he could do that. So this MVP teaches us how your unique value proposition kind of gets shaped around what is existing and what target customers want. And I want everyone to kind of understand, this is not someone that got handpicked by a record label. He manifested his own success with ambition, creativity, and an internet connection. That's something we all have. So certainly in terms of our MVPs, we should all think about how can we use the internet to build out some sort of an idea or MVP for our vision. What are the ways we can use the internet? All right, so my next one, Cult Gaia. We all know Cult Gaia, the ARC handbag, right? So let's talk about this example. So many people think actually that how it started with Cult Gaia was this ARC handbag, but actually it started before that. So let's go and take a look. And and now of course she's got this kind of multi-collection brand that does very well and makes a lot of money. So her vision was to create wearable art that would stand the test of time in our wardrobes. She had a unique point of view and unique pieces. She had about $7,000 in investment. She was an FIT grad. She had this collection that she had designed and she loved it. But she was realizing what was really resonating was she was making these flower crowns and hair turbans. It didn't cost a lot to do. She could manage the operational aspect by hand, and people were buying them. And in that time period, she also created the ARC bag around 2013. However, it was not a success. And she was kind of thinking about, well, my crowns are a success, my turbans are a success. What's happening with this bag? I love this bag. And it was very important for her to always stick with the DNA of her, to always stick to the ethos of her brand, the kind of aesthetic that she had, the kind of bohemian luxury look that she has. So she learned from kind of her feedback loops and what she was seeing that with her customers. So she had this ARC bag, and people would say, I love that ARC bag. Would you buy it? No, because I'm not sure I know how to use it. So she was seeing that if she wanted to make these art pieces, she needed to marry with that functionality. And not only do that, but then show the customer the functionality. So styling was key to what she sold. And she needed the everyday user to get that. She did not want to lose the brand ethos at any point because she wanted to be able to then easily make clothing, shoes, handbags. So she kind of always stuck to the flower crown kind of style, to the turban style, to that arc bag. They have the same kind of DNA. And one thing that she did was interesting. She had the arc bag in 2013. It didn't really go viral till about 2016 or so. And the whole point here is that she didn't necessarily let go of an idea. She had this idea. This was one of her MVPs. And she was thinking, well, what is the feedback telling me? People like it, but they won't buy it. What does that mean? What can I do to fix that? So she repositioned and rethought of that design, that creativity, and that helped build her brand. What do we learn from this MVP example? Simplified can and should showcase your creative stamp, allowing your community to develop an identity around your brand. So basically, even in her most simplified MVPs, flower crown, these turbans, it's always looked like her creativity. And so the community was developing and expected that of her and helped her almost better define her brand DNA. So she says, we were the first brand we were not the first brand with the flower crown. I didn't invent the flower crown. I didn't reinvent the wheel, but I was the first to do it as a really beautiful handmade luxury piece. And I want to emphasize that because sometimes I think we as creatives kick ourselves. We're like, we got to create something that doesn't exist. It's just about your creativity and what your creativity makes that thing better or interesting or unique. And someone had asked before, well, what if someone takes my idea? No one can ultimately take your idea when you're a creative person because, how you do it is unique to you. And yes, I do know, and I think people might say in the chat, well, like brands, copy designers, and yes, that goes on. But the way in which you produce something and how you do it, it's always going to be different. You could get a fast fashion retailer pick up on something you do, but your handmade, slow fashion, or your version, your materials, they're just unique to you. And how you position it, how you style it, those are key. All right, let's look at our next case study. I'm just going to take a look at the time. Okay, I'm going to have to kind of work a little bit quicker, but I'll do my best. Okay, so this is Refinery 29, huge media company. Guess what? When they started, they wrote it on a napkin. They wanted to be a digital mall, and they believed in the overall digital trend. So commerce as a platform was their value proposition. They worked together with some people. So these were two guys. One was a lawyer, another worked in politics, knew nothing about fashion, but they joined up with two other co-founders. One was actually the girlfriend and then her boss, and they were in the kind of fashion editorial industry. And they ideated and they decided to do this MVP, and it would be kind of like a little city guide, curated to small brands, great brands, home, music, fashion, just kind of like the city guide. And then their value proposition got refined because they realized what was resonating was that smaller brands, rather than big name stores, needed them. They weren't able to market. And so this platform was something they would use. So they then refined what they did to be targeted towards kind of the niche, smaller brands. They created features like Neighborhood Watch and Spotlight to test hypothesis of selling items and seeing if they would sell out. And guess what? They would. So, they really used their feedback loop. Oops, let me just go back to test their items. For them, it was really a process of understanding who their target truly was and what their target customer really wanted. And for them, it actually became women. And particularly, you can see here the quote from one of the founders. They were so invigorated by having access to the knowledge of our audience in real time. They paid a lot of attention to that feedback loop because it helped them just continue to build and build and build, stepping stone after another, one small task after another, into what they are today. This MVP teaches you really that honing your idea and building your credentials with an MVP and testing features inevitably leads to investment. So they were obviously, got a lot of investment after being around for a short period of time. And they got that because they continued to listen and iterate and grow their MVP. So that's an important aspect of an MVP. It can help you to gain capital. All right, so we're almost on my last one. So let's look at Chiara Ferragni, who started the Blonde Salad, one of really the first blogs in Italy to gain the kind of steam that she did. So the Blonde Salad Chiara and together with her boyfriend, they were in undergraduate university in Italy, and they were saying, well, I want to have a lifestyle magazine, a digital one perhaps, focused on fashion, art, and travel. Who wouldn't? I would love to do that. Everyone would, right? So what did she do at first? So one thing I'll say is the Harvard Business Review has a case study on this, and it's really interesting. So her boyfriend was particularly strategic about everything. He would just study what was out there and really and truly study it. And she used initially a mix of editorial and everyday pictures with high and low pieces complemented by accessories. And they posted on Flickr, and Flickr in particular, because photographers would post there. So they wanted to get that audience that was looking for content and visual and see what they thought of their pictures and learn from that. And then her second MVP was really to starting her personal blog. And by starting that personal blog, she was able to kind of learn more and build, an even more bigger community. And one of the things that she did was always post at the same time on the same days. She was always focused on the long-term goals. So very early on, she could have got some opportunities in show business, but the goal was to attract high fashion and luxury. And had she gone that route, that would have not been a possibility. They really allowed the numbers and data, who was watching, when were they watching, how were they watching, that to be their guide. They looked at industry trends. So the boyfriend had an internship in the gardening industry. And you could argue, well, sorry, what is the link? But he was able to distill the takeaways from what gardening was doing with social media and then loop it back into fashion. Very strategic and extremely resourceful. They took a lot of their pictures, utilized their friends, collaborated with people so that they could do things with little spend. Here, what we learn is that you can have a grand vision, but having an MVP helps to build that community that will get you to your grand vision and that will teach you lessons along the way. And strategic thinking and analysis led over emotional thinking in their creative pursuits. So they really put aside a lot of their emotional interests and things that they wanted to do and really thought about every decision they made was backed by data or what they saw happening or examples. All right, so my last example is a Spanx founder, and this goes back to the person saying that, hey, I think his name was Andre, what if I don't know about something? So this is Sarah Blakely, and she did not know anything about fashion or production or making pantyhose. But as she put it, she knew, and this is a quote, she wanted to make butts look better. So, she one night went to a party wearing white trousers, didn't like the look, so she ended up cutting a pair of her hosiery to make those trousers look better. And then she's like, well, why is this not happening? And she looked into it, and she learned a lot. First of all, that a lot of this was being produced in a certain part of the US by mostly men who didn't have to wear the stockings. And what her interesting tactic is something that we could all utilize. So her MVP was manifested through research, reading and interviewing and talking to people. And even if they hung up the phone, she'd call them back. And her first trip to go see factories, no one was interested. But she kept persisting, and eventually someone was interested. And his response as to why he was interested is that he had shared her idea with his female children, and they loved the idea. So, just goes to show that persistence is also important. Now, let's talk about our MVP. What did she do? She took existing hosiery and just looked at every aspect of it that didn't make sense, that people didn't like. And she took all those features, and this is that triangle, right? Of competitors, customers, value proposition. Her value proposition was essentially the opposite of what competitors produced. And her target customers were telling her that. And so she prototyped, when she made her initial Spanx prototype, it was perfected by simply research and looking at what existed and how that industry produced hosiery, which you have to read about. It was crazy. I mean, they didn't even think about the female form in many ways. So this was a one product led business that was conceived to solve a singular problem. So in many ways, it's similar to tech businesses. But she has been able to diversify her offering because she built a community around her product. So I want to get to two last examples. These are real people. These are people that are my friends. Margot is one of them. She's a friend of mine from Parsons. We attended at the same time. And she's an amazing fashion and textile designer. And she's building community and feedback for her art while also building cash flow and credibility. So this is just one. She does so many things. This is one example of how she's doing it. So she does a lot of contour drawing, and she does a lot of work with colors and shapes and cutting out paper. And she transferred that to wrapping paper. And so that's one of the things that you can buy. And this is a way that she is testing her usage of color, her DNA, her creative stamp as a textile designer. Does it resonate? Do people like it? And she's able to test that in a product that she's able to manage operationally. She prints it locally nearby where she lives. The other thing Margot does, she particularly likes fitness. So she started also Move with Margot, which you could argue has very little to do with creating a grand vision of a fashion textile business. However, one of the overlaps there is the kind of could be potentially athleisure. So by building that community and perhaps in future having a segue into her fashion and learning in that community, what works and doesn't work, she's able to use that feedback. Data and learning are key to the MVP process. And it's not about actually, sitting there and like actually making a product, but it's looking for ways to be creative in finding ways to learn from minimum viable products. That could be the internet, that could be an actual thing that you make, and that can be from reading and research or competitor existing product. The last example is Audrey, and she's pretty interesting because she's a communication designer in the tech industry. She makes presentations for venture cap firms, for startups. What's interesting about her, she's also a creative person who's very good at illustration. However, does she want to have a grand idea of doing a business, in the arts? Not necessarily. She's not sure. However, she started a shop on Etsy, creating a passive income stream for her, allowing her a creative outlet to do something a bit different than what she has to do for her day job, which sometimes can be not as creative, let's say, in terms of what you have to produce in the corporate world. And she's able to kind of put ideas out, see who wants it, because it's all by demand, and then operationally run that on a way that she can manage with her day job. And if things resonate, she makes more of those. And if they don't, she doesn't. And what's interesting too, by doing this, she got contacted by a major conference to do some work for them and make perhaps some merchandise for them. And it's not even something she initially set out or she thought about, but she put out kind of a little MVP of what she's about, what her creative stamp is, how she tends to draw and, emote her creativity. And that's seeming to attract opportunities, and that could grow into something. So I give you these two examples of Margot and Audrey because they're real people. They're like you and me, and they're able within their own, resources, who they know, their skill set, they're able to get started. So you shouldn't feel like you can't. You can absolutely do that. So the key takeaways are learning, strategic thinking, and don't forget, it takes a community. Get out there, share your ideas, show your product. You need the feedback. All right, I'm going to take a few last questions after. I'm going to ask Carly Ann actually to just come in, and I think she's going to give you guys the code, and then I'll take the last remaining questions.
All right, thank you so much, Shobana, for that very informative presentation on the importance of creating an MVP. So we're gonna get back to Q&A. If everyone who has questions, please put them in the Q&A box. But I just wanted to pop in And first, before I give you the code, I'd just like to thank our co-sponsors, Parsons Continuing and Professional Education, for partnering with us on this webinar. And as promised, if you would like to book a mentoring session with Shobana to work through the strategy on your MVP and launching your product, use the code MVP and you can get a 20% off discount on a mentoring session with Shobana. So if you go to the mentoring section on entrepreneuracademy.com, there you'll find our catalog of mentors, and you can find Shobana. You can go there and apply the code MVP in order to get 20% off. The code is only for a limited time, so please redeem it by July 31st. So you have until 11:59 on July 31st to redeem the code to get a 20% off discount. And you can have some one-on-one time with Shobana and work through your own MVP strategy. So again, thank you all for joining. And on that note, I'm going to let Shobana get back to your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Carly-Ann. I'm going to take a couple of more questions, so do put them in the Q&A if you have them. So an anonymous attendee said, you seem to suggest that then branding is an iterative process, not something decided from the beginning. And I would say, as our case studies have shown, if you look at Cult Gaia, if you look at, Spanx, you can have an idea of what you want to start with, but really seeing what resonates with consumers and how they think of your product, yes, it's iterative. And you can see this because, Burberry or Balmain, these major luxury houses that have so much heritage, even they rebranded. And it is something that you want to always think about and keep in your mindset as to how you want your product to be perceived and thought about. The other argument I would also make is that it's something that costs money. And when you have limited resources, you want to think about how you use those resources in a way that's about getting a product or service out versus, having a really nice typeface, but then don't have the money for the product. Because where you're going to get the feedback is on the actual item that is a stepping stone for your business. Another anonymous person says, what if you launch your MVP and find that the audience is not who you thought it would be initially? How do you incorporate disruptive data into your plan? That's actually awesome that you're suddenly finding out that who you thought was your target audience isn't, because guess what? You've had done limited amount of work and you've learned something, which is huge. Now, the way you would incorporate this is you would pivot and think about constructing something and realize you try to understand why the audience you thought about doesn't need it, but another audience does, and you try to suit their needs. Or you think about, ways in which to incorporate the data from that into to creating features in your product that does suit that audience. Another anonymous person says, how do you manage taxes for an online business? Filling taxes to each state seems to be very overwhelming. Would it be better to hire someone to take care of it? Is there a strategic way to file taxes without being overwhelmed? To my understanding, each state has different laws in regard to filing taxes. Okay, that seems very hard to keep up with. So I am not allowed to, I can't give tax advice because I'm not an accountant. But what I can say is that there is on the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy, I think Andy Smiles is her name, presenting on taxes and how to deal with that as a creative entrepreneur. So do take a look at that. There's a couple of takeaways, and I think she might have even done a webinar. So that's available. Second, I will say that taxes often look at where you reside versus the different places where you get income. So like a global, so like an e-commerce brand, for example, that has sales, or like an Etsy brand, they're paying where they reside versus where the sales are coming from. That's just kind of an aside, but again, I'm not a tax expert. Okay, so do you have a suggestion for an educational content business for an MVP and where to start? So that's a little bit of a difficult question because an educational consultant. So I'm assuming this means tutoring, but I'm not completely sure. So ideas of an MVP. Well, the thing with something like that, with consulting people on education and tutoring them, is that you really need to get a community to believe that you're capable of creating results. So the way in which you might want to do that are, and there's a teacher here in where I live who does these kind of writing workshops with a group of students so that the cost is low. So parents are more likely to just spend the money because it's like $20, but she has like about 10 students for like a period of 90 minutes, and she works on them with essay writing. And so if you can get involved with like the group of people, so in this case, she got involved with like the parents network and put it out there that she can do these right before school starts again. So when, the summer melt happens and then you got to remember everything you learned, she comes in and she does this, and that helps her establish credibility and build her business. Does the couching, sorry, does it, okay, so
I answered that for you. So the mentoring sessions, when you book them on our website, they happen via Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Carly Ann. Okay, so anonymous attendee, could you give an example or suggest how to go about creating an MVP for a design service? Okay, so let's assume this is, I'm going to say graphic design, or okay, let's look at graphic design. Let's look at interior design. Okay, a graphic designer, one thing that you can do is make artwork using your graphic skills. There's a lot of people using Procreate to just do kind of artwork. You can try to do that in a more, let's say more detailed way, because you can use the full Adobe tool set. So that's one idea, and that can have your creative stamp of how you interpret and draw. You can charge for that and learn from that. Interior designer, you can have different packages and different rates. A lot of people want to take advantage of interior design services, but can't necessarily afford, a higher end service. So you can look at ways of working with local small businesses where you live that sell furniture or decor, and seeing if there's a way that you can help sell their product to various people that want to set up their house. So I would love to be more detailed and actually go through the roadmap, but I would need a little bit more detail on your background to do that. Okay, so we're going to take, let's say, 2 more questions. So Augustine Daniel, where do you get co-founders? For instance, you're business-minded but need a product designer for your idea. I don't reside in a big city, so isn't very easy to find one. Are there online platforms I can leverage? Well, first things first, I would Google that and check if there are. And I have seen companies that say, we'll design your product for you. However, I would do my due diligence and make sure they're the right partners. Maybe start out with something small or something, very basic to understand how they operate before going all in. Second is Parsons Entrepreneur Academy. There is this kind of like network platform where you can put something like that out there and see if there are other people. Maybe there's a designer who doesn't have the business background and is looking to work together. One thing I will say about co-founders is it's something that should happen organically. It's not something where you can just say, like, hey, Carly Ann, let's be co-founders. It doesn't happen like that. It needs to happen in a way that's more kind of fluid and natural. However, if you're just wanting to pay someone to help you build out a product, put it on the network in the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy, and I guarantee there will be people willing and interested to be involved. Augustine, so that was Augustine Daniel. And another anonymous person said, I wasn't sure when you went to the sustainable market how that created an MVP in your example. Okay, so by going to the sustainable market, one of the grand vision is to start a store for sustainable products, right? And without actually starting a store, I wouldn't necessarily know the demand, the traffic of people, what times they come, what are the typical products they're looking for. So by attending that event, I was able to kind of listen in, see what was resonating, ask questions, get a couple of people's details to kind of talk with them later. They were interested. So that's how I utilized that event to it wasn't my event. I didn't have to put the money out, but I used it as an MVP to learn from. So kind of like the Spanx case study, where she just took things that were existing and learned from them. I looked at the features that worked and that didn't work, and we'll use that then to build out the idea of having the store. Kempe Scanlon, the last question of the evening. What's the best way to seek investment to launch? I have prototypes, high performance activewear with tech component, but am not selling. Would you recommend a fashion incubator? Would an angel investor commit if you have everything ready to go, but you are not selling? So I think so you always want to have investment from smart money, because smart money is what gets you from A to B to C. There are people who might just give you some money, but they might end up owning a lot of your business, or kind of taking advantage of what you have to offer. So look for smart money. Smart money typically wants to see sales. They want that feedback loop. They want that data. That's why I say the MVP really helps with investment, because it gives people data and actual connectivity to target customers that are willing to pay money. It tells them what they're thinking. So if you do have this high performance activewear with this tech component, you know what I would do? I would maybe talk to some gym people, like trainers or yoga instructors. Start a community, start working with one of those communities, and see if you can collaborate with them and see if they can test your product, and get their feedback, and try to build that into what you're doing, and then start socializing the idea with investors, smart investors. So someone's saying, what is smart money? What are smart investors? These are people that have a track record, that have invested and they don't have to have invested in Google, okay, but they have to have a track record of investing. There are forums for, let's say, women or people of color, and they tend to attract smart angel investors who come to those. But it's always better if you're able to present your product with the data. I'm sure on some way or another, some of you have watched Shark Tank. And one of the things that happens is someone comes up with a really awesome presentation and a really great product. And then they say, well, what are your sales? And they're like, well, yeah, my sales was X. And that's kind of like when it kind of goes downhill, right? So having that data and then showing that people are willing to put money for your product, or willing to try your product, or gave you useful feedback, helps with that discussion for investment. So it's not necessarily that, having sales is awesome. Can you get investment without it? Yes. But having some data that backs your business case, I think, is vital. And usually someone who's an intelligent, strategic investor who's successful is going to look for that data. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone. I really enjoyed doing this. It was one of those, evenings that seem to have gone on along a little bit longer. So I hope I haven't taken too much of your time, and really look forward to connecting with some of you. I'm on the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy network. I like utilizing it. It's really fun. And, if you would like a mentoring session, I'm happy to oblige as well. And I hope that the roadmap serves you guys well, and that the information that we spoke about today is helpful. And I really look forward to seeing some of your ideas. If you use a roadmap, feel free to tag me. I'd love to see how you use it, or that you're using it. That would be exciting. And I think that's about it. So I'll hand back to Carly-Ann.
Thank you again, Shobana, for this amazing webinar. I see all of the thanks coming up in the chat. So I just want to remind everyone again, if you would like to book a session with Shobana for attending the webinar, you get this coupon code, which is MVP, and you can use that to get 20% off of an hour-long session with Shobana. But please be sure to redeem it before 11:59 on July 31st. And thank you all again for joining us on the Entrepreneur Academy Network for another one of our webinars. We're grateful to have you all in our community, and we look forward to seeing you all at future events. Thank you again, Shobana. Thank you again to our sponsors, Parsons Continuing and Professional Education.
Thank you.